Today, the logical question to ask, and I'm not making this up, is atheism dead?
No, that's going to be a hard nope.
Hello everyone, I'm Professor Blink. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. Today we're looking at a video from Eric Metaxas, a relentlessly self-promoting apologist who has been trying like hell to raise himself to the level of a Frank Turek or a Kirk Cameron for the last several years. And 4 years ago, he wrote a book titled, Is Atheism Dead? And he hasn't stopped trying to hammer that line home as his catchphrase du jour ever since. A line that is especially funny given the consistently declining rates of Christianity in the U.S. in favor of general agnosticism, categorized as being a religious none, N-O-N-E, also the ever-shrinking rates of God belief across the rest of the Western world, and the subtle but undeniable rise in convinced atheism on a worldwide scale. But none of that matters to Eric. After all, the man's got books to sell and a religious base to placate with the insistence that they've backed the right philosophical pony and that their ideological opposition is positively in its death throes. And to that end, he's gone on a little talk show to keep beating this long-dead horse and an attempt to rationalize his thesis about atheism being dead with some different lines of argumentation in an effort to prove his case. Never mind that arguments are not proof or evidence of any kind. They are instead ways of interpreting evidence. And interpretations of evidence that argue for the existence of God are about as rational as arguing that the moon must be made out of cheese because he once got hit in the head by a lump of moldy cheese that must have fallen off the moon. That also just happened to coincide with hearing the mousetrap on the far side of the room go off. So let's give Eric Matentionhor our undivided and see if he can make anything close to a salient point in trying to establish that atheism is dead. Which I guess would make all of us non-believers some kind of ghosts, or maybe zombies, which would mean that we crave brains, which would mean that Eric has nothing to fear from us. But before we get to that, if you end up liking what you see in this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe and click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. Check out my social media, including my Patreon, Twitter, and Blue Sky, all linked in the description. And of course, like this video, maybe pop in a comment. All that goes a long way towards pleasing the YouTube algorithm, preferring practical, provable principles, pushing past pious pretenses, and promoting progressive, positive perspectives while purging praising proselytizers. May keep my channel motoring along. Now on to today's video.
Today, the logical question to ask, and I'm not making this up, is atheism dead? I actually say atheism as an intellectual idea is dead. There may be a lot of atheists, but there are a lot of flat earthers. It doesn't change the fact that we know the earth is not flat.
Careful, Eric. I wouldn't go too far with that particular analogy, because the Venn diagram of flat earthers and God believers has quite a bit of overlap. I mean, not all theists are flat earthers, but pretty much all flat earthers are theists. Kind of like how all young earth creationists are theists. Flat Earth mostly is a radical offshoot of theism. I mean, how are you going to believe that we live on a flat pizza that defies all known laws of physics unless you think there's a magical, all-powerful being out there making it so? So, that's not the best analogy for your position. All you're pointing out is that there can be a lot of people who cling to stubborn, irrational beliefs in spite of all the evidence to the contrary. Like belief in God, for instance.
Einstein, in 1911, you can't think of a greater scientist except for Isaac Newton than Albert Einstein. In 1911, his equations were leading him to believe the universe is expanding, which means that if it's expanding, that at one point, if you go backwards from where it expanded, that it started at a single point. This was what Einstein came up with privately. As a scientist, he thought, this is embarrassing. People are going to accuse me of being a creationist, of talking about the Bible. So I have to hide this information. So he created this cosmological constant, this fudge factor, because he was so embarrassed by what the evidence from science was showing.
That's not entirely accurate.
For starters, no, Einstein did not resist the idea of an expanding universe because he was worried that people would think he was pushing the Bible or God or creationism. In fact, at the time when he made his famous equations about relativity, the prevailing scientific consensus about the universe was that it was static and unchanging in terms of its total size and shape. So Einstein was just going along with the scientific consensus of the day and trying to fit his discoveries into what had already been established. And that was what led to his embarrassment, once it was discovered, thanks to the work of Edwin Hubble, that the universe was indeed expanding. But his only reason for dismissing it was his reluctance to go against the scientific orthodoxy at the time, not because he was afraid he was inadvertently advocating for religion. Einstein was the first to recognize how controversial his ideas might be. In a letter to physicist and friend Paul Ehrenfest in early 1917, Einstein wrote, "I have, again, perpetrated something about gravitational theory which somewhat exposes me to the danger of being confined in a madhouse." Einstein knew that the only reason for his cosmological constant to exist was to secure a static and stable finite universe. He wanted this kind of universe, and he did not want to look much further. Quietly hiding in his equations, though, was another model for the universe, one with an expanding geometry. In 1922, the Russian physicist Alexander Friedmann would find the solution. As for Einstein, it was only in 1931, after visiting Hubble in California, that he accepted cosmic expansion and discarded at long last his vision of a static cosmos. His only real embarrassment came because he didn't follow the science, but instead kowtowed to what the general consensus was. Something science and scientists should never do, because reality isn't based on what most people think. But then furthermore, how the hell is this supposed to point to a God in the first place? The fact that the universe is expanding in no way points to any God. I mean, this story alone testifies to that. We've known definitively now for the last 100 years that the universe is indeed expanding and has been ever since the Big Bang. And none of the physicists who proved that initially, nor any of the work that has been done in that field in the preceding 100 years, has claimed that it pointed to any kind of God being at work. In fact, not only do scientists in general have the lowest amount of God belief and the highest concentration of atheists, but even among scientists, do you know who reports the absolute lowest percentage of God belief? That would be physicists and astronomers. Now, why would that be if the movements of the universe, the very things that they spend their life studying, pointed to the existence of a divine creator?
And so this concept of the Big Bang developed where scientists were embarrassed because they said, well, it looks like the universe was created out of nothing. That's what science is saying.
Wrong, sir. Wrong.
Ahem. The Big Bang was not the explosion of the universe out of nothing. It is the expansion of the current presentation of our universe from an initial state of high density and temperature. I would have to say, probably more than anything else in the entire grab bag of creationist, apologist, oft-repeated flotsam, this one right here absolutely takes the cake. And it, more than anything else, shows their inherent dishonesty. No scientist, no physicist, no astronomer, no cosmologist, absolutely none of them say that the universe came from nothing. Not even Lawrence Krauss claimed that the universe came from nothing, and he literally wrote a book titled A Universe from Nothing. But he explains in the book that he's using the term nothing a bit facetiously, and the nothing he's talking about is still filled with all kinds of stuff.
When you think about nothing, you have to be a little more careful than you normally are, because in fact nothing is a physical concept, because it's the absence of something, and something is a physical concept. And what we've learned over the last 100 years is that nothing is much more complicated than we would have imagined otherwise. For example, the simplest kind of nothing is the kind of nothing of the Bible, say an infinite empty space, an infinite dark void of the Bible. You know, nothing in it, no particles, no radiation, nothing. Well, that kind of nothing turns out to be full of stuff in a way, or at least much more complicated than you might have imagined, because due to the laws of quantum mechanics and relativity, we now know that empty space is a boiling, bubbling brew of virtual particles that are popping in and out of existence at every moment. And in fact, for that kind of nothing, if you wait long enough, You're guaranteed by the laws of quantum mechanics to produce something.
But every source you could ever look for will say over and over and over again how the universal expansion began from something like a primordial singularity, or a point of infinite density and energy that was unstable and collapsed into an expanding universe. Or all the energy that would become the entire universe was condensed into a single point. Many different ways of saying the same thing, that it all started from something. Hell, listen to the starting lyrics of the theme song for that CBS sitcom.
The whole universe was in a hot, dense state that nearly 14 billion years ago expansion started.
Textbooks, science websites, documentaries about cosmology, lectures from knowledgeable scientists, or even any high school science class will tell you in every way imaginable that the universe most definitely, positively, absolutely did not come from nothing. And yet, every religious apologist from Metaxas to Hovind to Turek to Kokel to Konecki, you name it, they all regurgitate this same fat load of bull about how all of science now says and agrees that the universe came from nothing. And since you can't have something come from nothing without a downright miracle being involved, then that must mean that an all-powerful God created everything from nothing. Hallelujah! Praise the Lord! Well, no, you lying fraud of a lying fraudster. No one, except other lying fraud apologists like yourself, say that the universe came from nothing. Science does not claim that. Science is and has long been extremely clear on this subject. The Big Bang expanded out of a hot, dense starting point, and there's absolutely no evidence that there was ever an absolute philosophical nothing like you continually claim.
The evidence from science that has come out of what's called the fine-tuning argument is so insane that I just scratched the surface in this book.
I would absolutely agree with you on that one, Eric. Thinking that the fine-tuning argument constitutes a good reason to believe in the existence of a God is, seriously, so insane. But I think we're approaching it from different perspectives there.
But that is something that in our lifetimes, the evidence from science for a fine-tuned universe, that everything is calibrated so perfectly that it doesn't make sense that it just happened, that is the killer. It's killer evidence.
No, it really isn't. And there's a number of reasons that it isn't. For starters, it's irritating that you just threw that out as a bald assertion and didn't provide a single example of what you were talking about. I mean, what exactly is fine-tuned that you think cannot have happened but for the machinations of an all-powerful supernatural being? Is it the distance of the Earth to the Sun being perfect to allow for life? Because no, that's not miraculous. Nearly every solar system of every star has some planets within the habitable zone that is the proper distance to allow our kind of biological life to thrive. It's so commonplace that ours isn't even the only planet in our own solar system within the habitable zone. Mars is also in that range. Also, all the other things about our planet that we find to be so fine-tuned for our kinds of life, like, say, the proper amount of oxygen or the proper size of the planet resulting in the right amount of gravity or the right kinds of food and water, etc. Well, all of that is putting the cart before the horse. None of those things are fine-tuned for us. None of it was made with us in mind. None of it was adapted to us. We are the result of all of those things being present, and we arose and adapted to them. We breathe oxygen because we evolved in an oxygen-rich environment. If the atmosphere of the Earth had been primarily methane, then methane-breathing creatures might have evolved and lamented about how their methane god created a methane planet just for them. But no, they just adapted to the environment. Same with gravity. If the gravity of the planet were double what it is, then hardier, thicker, denser creatures with significantly greater muscle mass to withstand the gravitational pressure might have evolved, and then be saying that if gravity were much lighter, they would lose their muscle mass and bone density and they'd all die out. We are adapted to our environment to such a degree that, yes, if that environment were considerably different, we would die. But that doesn't mean that the environment we exist in was fine-tuned for us. It just means that we adapted to it so well, we now can't survive outside of it. This line of thinking is, if anything, an argument for evolution and natural selection. Something that creationists hate and insist is a lie, far more so than it is for the existence of a God. Because we know evolutionary adaptation happens. We know natural selection exists. Because we can see it happening in real time with things like viruses and bacteria that grow to adapt to their environment and become more resistant to antibiotics or other harmful substances. We don't, however, know that supernatural fine-tuning occurs, and there's no reason, beyond wanting it to be true, to think that it does.
We'd all say, like, we all believe in chance, so if I flip a quarter, it could go heads or tails, right? Great. What if I flip a quarter and it lands on its edge? You'd be like, whoa, that's weird, but it could happen. Mm-hmm. It could happen, okay? Yeah. But imagine I flip it again and it does it again. What are the odds of that? Astronomical. Mm-hmm. Okay, I flip it again, it happens again. What if it happens 100 times in a row? You would also all look around and go, this is not, something weird is happening.
There is nothing about the way our planet exists, or our solar system, or the universe at large that defies chance. When it comes to seeking out other Earth-like planets, which would include planets that have liquid water on the surface and stable environments like atmosphere and land, and are in the habitable zone of their stars, scientists have already discovered somewhere between 30 to 50 Earth-like exoplanets, out of a total of 4,000 that have been discovered. Extrapolating from that, astronomers estimate there is anywhere from 300 million to 40 billion Earth-like planets in the Milky Way galaxy alone. A galaxy that is just one of literally trillions of galaxies in the observable universe. This is another common trick of religious apologists, insisting that the chances of our planet or universe existing the way that it does and allowing for our kind of life are so incredibly slim as to be next to impossible. But they base that on pretty much nothing. Just the continued insistence that it must have been made for us. Again, putting the cart before the horse and not realizing that we adapted to it rather than it being adapted for us. And an unwarranted assumption that there was a same or greater chance of the values of the universe, like heat or gravity, being different from what they are, when they have no evidence that the values of the universe even could be different from what they are, let alone a greater chance of them being different from what they are. Really, it's all just scrambling to come up with some kind of rationale that sounds reasonable for them to posit the machinations of a supernatural, magical being casting divine spells that make everything in the universe all hunky-dory for one particular species of balding apes. Or actually, making everything in the universe pretty shitty, but ultimately somewhat survivable for that balding ape. Because this magical being really, really likes said balding ape. But just so long as they don't touch themselves at night or eat shellfish. Oh, and make sure you cut that extra skin off of your dicks too, because that really matters to the magic man for some reason.
This is, again, in our lifetimes, they've discovered that the size of the Earth, you know, you watch Star Trek, you watch these movies, you think, hey, a planet could be any size. They have discovered in our lifetimes that if the Earth were the tiniest bit smaller, I mean like the tiny, like 2-3%, we could not have our atmosphere, we could not have life.
You're a dumb, stupid bastard.
We just have to chalk this one up to Eric being legitimately dumb and not knowing how to math properly. I always say, never chalk up to dishonesty what can be better explained by stupidity. And I think Eric just misread the scientific findings and is now running off at the mouth with his bullshit. The recent scientific finding that he's referencing came from this article, Atmospheric Evolution on Low-Gravity Water Worlds. Its findings are broken down in this article about how small the smallest exoplanets can be and still support life. The new peer-reviewed results were first published in the Astrophysical Journal on August 13, 2019. They said, how small is too small? The critical boundary point seems to be about 2.7% of the mass of Earth. Any planet less massive than that would lose their atmosphere to space before liquid water could form on their surfaces, and any water that might be present would vaporize or freeze. For comparison, the Moon is 1.2% of Earth's mass, and Mercury is 5.53%. So, Eric saw this, or perhaps some other dipshit relayed this information improperly to him and then he just ran with it without checking on it first, and he thought that when it said that the boundary is about 2.7% of the mass of the Earth, that meant that the Earth could only be 2 or 3% smaller before it would lose its atmosphere. No, Eric, that's not what it said. It said a planet could be 2.7% of the mass of the Earth. So if Earth is 100% of the mass of the Earth, then a planet could be just 2.7% of that and still hold its atmosphere and form liquid water and, be habitable. So to use Eric's vernacular, a planet could actually be about 97% smaller than Earth and still support life. Learn how to read, you supposed author.
But they've also discovered, if that's not weird enough, that if we're 2 or 3% larger, we could not have our atmosphere.
And that's another big fail. Astronomers generally define a super-Earth as any planet between the size of Earth and 10 times more massive. Astronomers tend to call planets larger than that mini-Neptunes, but that apparently clean distinction disguises a lot of nuances that are important for determining habitability. Obviously, something closer to the size of Earth has a better chance of being habitable, because presumably it's very similar to Earth. And something closer to the size of Neptune probably would not be a very fun place for life to find a foothold, because Neptune in general isn't all that hospitable, at least according to the definition above. This all means that an Earth-like planet can be 10 times the size of Earth. That would be 1,000% larger than Earth, and still support life, Eric. Now, this one might be him being outright deceptive, because I couldn't find anything anywhere that even came close to verifying his idea that the Earth could only be a couple percent larger and then not be able to support life. I'm thinking that he came across that idea of a planet not being able to be habitable if it was less than 2.7% the mass of Earth. Then he misunderstood that as meaning that the Earth couldn't be more than 2.7% smaller. And then he thought that was a great argument for fine-tuning. And then just extrapolated, based on nothing, that, well, if it can't be more than 2.7% smaller, I'll bet that means it can't be more than 2.7% bigger either. I mean, that just makes logical sense. And then he just ran with that based on nothing. Because the second he said that, without even looking anything up, I knew he was full of it. I mean, we have known for a hell of a long time that larger size planets can support life.
I'm saying, so you mean to tell me that if our Earth were not exactly the size that it is, there would be no life?
No, Eric, that's not what I mean to tell you. What I mean to tell you is that you're dumb, and wrong, and a grifter, and desperate for attention and relevance, and all in service to a god that doesn't exist in the first place.
The planet Jupiter is 400 million miles away from Earth. If you've ever seen it in the night sky, it's like a pinprick of light. It's so far away you can't even imagine. It's 4 times farther than the sun. Tiny. There it is. Okay. Science now knows, this is science, we're not talking about the Bible, we're talking about science, says that if Jupiter weren't there with its tremendous mass, because it's a very large planet, its gravity is so strong that it is drawing away 99.9% of the asteroids and meteors that would hit Earth.
Okay, so what? I mean, that's like saying that the big tree in your yard provides shade and kept you from getting sunburnt when you were mowing the grass. Oh, therefore, God must have put that tree there. No. That's what we would call a coincidence. And it's not even a one-way, totally beneficial coincidence either. The fact that Jupiter absorbs or deflects so much material in its planetary neighborhood led to the common idea that it is a shield for the inner solar system, intercepting asteroids and comets that might otherwise come our way. But research has suggested that Jupiter's influence may actually work both ways, pulling objects into its gravity well sometimes and slingshotting them into the inner solar system other times. Simulations have suggested that while the presence of a large planet like Jupiter in our solar system might decrease the likelihood of a comet from the Oort cloud colliding with Earth, it can actually increase the likelihood of an impact with an asteroid or short-period comet, those with orbits closer to the Sun. Additionally, but Jupiter creates both good and bad conditions for earthly life. Consider that its powerful gravity prevented space rocks orbiting near it from coalescing into a planet, and that's why our solar system today has an asteroid belt, consisting of hundreds of thousands of small flying chunks of debris. So, while it may deflect some of the asteroids that threaten to hit us, it is the entire reason that other dangerous asteroids exist in the first place. So, at best, it's a mixed bag of positives and negatives, neither of which indicate any kind of divine hand at work. I mean, we live in a solar system. All solar systems are a mix of different planets orbiting a star. Most planets have other larger planets within their solar systems, which are going to have more mass and therefore greater gravity, and therefore deflect other celestial bodies towards them. The vast majority of planets in existence have cosmically nearby larger planets deflecting space debris. This isn't special.
Then you get down to the fundamental laws of physics. If any of the fundamental laws of physics, the value of gravity, whatever, were different by like 0.00001, there would be no universe.
And here we come to the constants of the universe argument. I seem to be dealing with this one a lot lately. It seems to be the apologist's currently favored argument, at least when they're trying to sound smart and science-y. But it all hinges on one fatal flaw. If the constants were even slightly different, the universe couldn't exist. If. Tell me, Eric, what are the odds? And I mean precisely calculate the odds and show your work. What are the odds that the values of gravity or the electromagnetic force or the nuclear force could be different? Please, do the math and run the numbers for me. Oh, that's right, you can't. Because we have no idea how to change the constants of the universe to even the slightest degree. We have no basis for saying that it's even possible for the constants to be different from what they are. We don't know if there was a range of potential values that the fundamental forces could have had, or if there was only one possible outcome when the Big Bang began, and there was only one value the constants could possibly have. This entire line of thinking hinges on assuming, without any evidence, that not only could the values of the constants have been different, but that there is a practically infinite number of possible values that they could have had, and that there was an entirely equal chance for those values being anything other than what they are. And furthermore, that the values being anything other than what they are would result in no possible universe of any kind and no possible life of any kind. Literally all of that is gross speculation based on nothing, and assuming a nature to existence that is not in evidence. The fact of the matter is that we have one universe to derive data from. One. This one. With its rigidly set constants that, for all of our scientific knowledge, and even theoretical physics hypothesizing info about the universe, we don't have the slightest idea how to change or manipulate or get around those constants. So to assume that the constants of the universe could even be different is just an attempt to make an end run around physics to get you to your God without doing the in-between work to get there. I mean, this is textbook God of the gaps arguing. The universe exists in a certain way. Well, why does the universe exist in that way? We don't know because we know very little about the universal constants other than what they are and that they can't change. But why are they what they are to begin with? We don't know. Well, then it must have been God. Well, but we don't even know that the constants could be different at all. No, they absolutely could have been different, and the only reason they are what they are is because God made them that way. Well, prove it, Sparky.
Oh, that's right, you can't.
So that was the end of Eric Metaxas' interview and his 4 years in attempt to scare up some publicity for his book. It's always funny when someone who is scientifically illiterate attempts to use scientific arguments to make their case for the incredibly unscientific notion of a god existing. And Eric displayed heaping helpings of that scientific illiteracy here today. He started off completely misrepresenting Einstein and the idea of him being afraid that he was invoking religion with his equations, and that being why he didn't want to propose an expanding universe, when it was clearly a hesitancy to go against prevailing scientific beliefs of the time. Not to mention there being no reason to think that an expanding universe pointed in any way towards a god. Then he bit into an old apologist trope of claiming that science says that the universe came from nothing. Newsflash, Eric, it doesn't. Nothing in Big Bang cosmology posits there ever having been a nothing. That's just bullshit that other scientifically illiterate apologist hucksters claim and continue to claim over and over, no matter how many times you prove to them that it doesn't say that. And this is how you know they're hucksters. You show them exactly how they are definitively wrong, and even if they say, oh, okay, well, my bad, in the moment, next week they'll be right back on some other podcast or interview making the same erroneous claims all over again. Because it works for them and they don't care if they're outright lying. After all, outright lying is their entire shtick. Then Eric went into some totally wrong fine-tuning claims about the Earth, like how it can't be any more than 2 or 3% smaller and still support life, even though that was just a blatant misreading of the data, and the Earth can actually be about 97% smaller and still support life. Same with his claim of it not being able to be any bigger when we know a planet can be significantly bigger than the Earth and support life. Sprinkle in some BS about the constants of the universe could easily have been different and basing that on absolutely nothing, and you've got a level of science-y sounding flotsam that makes you wonder if he's angling for a position at the Discovery Institute. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. Eric seems to me to be the type of guy who will regurgitate any amount of religious hogwash if the paycheck is right. But all of that being said, and with all things considered, it might actually still be a good idea to consider that Is Atheism Dead book of his.
All right. I've got to test it first. I beg your pardon? Where's your outhouse?
It's in the back.
And so that is where we'll end things for today. So thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe so you'll always be notified when a new video comes out. Check me out on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Patreon if you'd like to support my work directly. My Teespring if you want some Pleeky merchandise. All that linked below in the description. Special shout out to my most recent super thankers here on YouTube, Salvi Mike, Autumnal Fling, Michael Martin, and Alloy IV Wizard. And with that said, until next time, I'm Professor Plank reminding you to keep striving for greater understanding. It's the best way to get wherever you want to go.